Hey everyone, it's me, Christine. Me being me on my journey to 50, being fit for 50. Well, I'm excited about today's video. We're going to be talking about guilt and shame. And how am I going to be excited about talking about guilt and shame? Is because we're not supposed to have guilt and shame in our lives. We are to be free from guilt and shame. Do you ever notice on the internet, especially with celebrities, people are trying to guilt them by not doing the right thing, wearing the wrong thing, not bringing their kids up the right way, their what they wear, what they look like, how their hair is, they're too fat, they're too thin, and people are constantly trying to guilt and shame them into changing their way to what these people think is the right way. And what does that get us? Nowhere. It gets us nowhere. What it does is it depresses us that we're not good enough. We're not being who we want to be. We're never good enough. And then you get depressed and feel guilty about everything. And that just brings you right down into a rabbit hole of depression. And then you start thinking, well, I'm not good enough for anything. Maybe I should just leave this earth. I should kill myself because I'm not good enough. You feel guilty because you can't keep people happy. You're a people pleaser. And it becomes pretty depressing that you can't change. But there is good news. As many of you know, I started reading a book called Girl, Stop Apologizing by Rachel Hollis. And it's a very good book. And so far, I haven't read it all. I know I've got another book started. I've got like 5 books on the go. I really ought to finish at least one of them. But this part of the book I read really kind of hit home with me. She actually talks about mummy guilt. And I'm just going to read to you what she says in here. It says, mummy guilt. In case you haven't ever experienced it personally, in this gross, horrendous, cancerous thing that lodges itself in your heart and creeps its way to your head, where it festers forever, unless you actively choose to kill it. Mummy guilt likes to remind you on the regular of all the ways you're failing your children. Some women struggle with guilt on topics like going to work. Others struggle under the weight of guilt associated with everything from wanting time for themselves to not feeding their kids the right kind of blueberries. And I guess if that was the only thing you had to worry about, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But being a mom means there are 967 things to worry about on any given day. So not only are you responsible for someone else's clothes, shelter, and dental hygiene, but you're also going to go ahead and beat yourself up for those 967 choices you're making as you're making them, and think that this will empower you to do better next time. No way. This is going to confuse and overwhelm you and zap you of whatever confidence you had in yourself as a mom, which, let's be honest, is tenacious on the best of days. I can already hear the critics on this one. Well, you told us to be self-aware. You told us we should be honest about the areas where we can improve. You're right. The problem is that mummy guilt isn't about self-awareness. Mummy guilt is about self-destruction. Part of growth in any area of life is a willingness to make changes to improve. But mummy guilt isn't really about improving, and more often than not, it's debilitating. And yet we go back to it again and again. Hear me when I say this. It doesn't serve you in any way. It doesn't serve your children either. I said something like this recently on a live stream, and a commentator said something like this. No, guilt is so important. Feeling guilty is how we know we're doing something wrong. Guilt is God's way of telling us we're making bad choices. Holy crap. No, seriously, that's a load of crap wrapped up and pretending to be holy. Isn't that the truth? Rachel continues on. one more paragraph. I want to read one more paragraph that she said. It says, I don't care what religion you were raised in. You weren't taught guilt and shame by your Creator. You were taught guilt and shame by people. That means whatever your people thought was shameful is what you learned to be ashamed of. Whatever your family or the influential people in your life thought was something to feel guilty about is what you have guilt about now. And this is so true. It comes from the outside and tries to get in you. So the first verse that I found in the Bible was Romans 8:1. It says, so now, which is now, there is no condemnation for those who belong to Christ. It doesn't say there's a little bit. It says there is no condemnation. So there's no guilt or shame now. In John 3:17, God did not send his Son into the world to judge the world guilty, but to save the world through him. God is a loving God. And then in Psalm 34:22, but the Lord will redeem those who serve him. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned. So the best story I found in the Bible about how condemnation is not God's way, guilt and shame is not God's way, is when is in the story of the adulteress in John chapter 8, verse 3-11. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to Jesus, a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses, in the law, commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear them. So when they continued asking him, he raised up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Wow. Think about that. The law back then is they could stone a woman. It doesn't matter that the man was adulterous too. It was the woman who would get stoned to death for being adulterous. And what did Jesus do? Jesus said right to her, I don't condemn you, but go and sin no more. Do you think that would have changed her? That would more than likely change her. If you're a good parent and you want to teach your children that, what's good, what's right, and what's wrong, you're not going to guilt them and shame them into doing the right thing, because they're not going to do it to change. They're going to do it because of fear and guilt. So that's not going to stick. So I would love to hear from you and see what your victory is over guilt and condemnation and shame, and that how you got out of it. Because I like to hear stories of when people have victories over their lives, victories over fear and victory over shame and guilt. And I love to hear these things. If you have any kind of victories over listening to my videos, let me know. And if it's okay with you, I want to share people's stories as well. So this is me, Christine, me being me, on my journey to 50, being fit for 50, and hope you have a most wonderful week, guilt and shame free. Have a good one.